What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast. We are here with Professor David Collum, and it is an honor to have you back on the show. And it seems to me like you've upgraded from the wood shop, and we're not going to hear the harrowing noises this time.
Yeah, I don't. I think they're done fixing the hallway. Um, yeah, yeah, perfect name for a show for me. I think Run Your Mouth. Um,
Well, that's why we have it, because you don't have to own everything you say. We're exploring, we're looking for truth. And off the bat, you wrote another amazing end of year recap. I always look forward to them. And I was awaiting for part 3 to have you on, and I finally had to reach out to go, where's part 3? Part 3 is supposed to be the creepy kid stuff that didn't arrive next year. Is it because you're still building the bunker? You don't feel safe putting it out there? What's the status on part 3?
um, the I don't feel safe putting it out there part would happen at the very end. So I'd write it and then go, okay, I can't release this. So until I'm done writing it, I won't know that. I've even talked to people about writing something, and can you truly write something anonymously? And the challenge is, so part 3 is where I talk about chat trafficking and pedophilia and stuff like that. I intended to write about it last year and didn't get to it, and it wasn't ready either. So I said, okay, I'll write it later. Now I have time, and it's very difficult writing for me because I'm diving into shit that's just soul ripping, right, all the way down to frazzled drip and everything else. And the other thing is that there's a vast amount of stuff that you by no means could bet a paycheck on to be true. And so there's all these people making all these claims, and you've got several problems. One is some could just be liars. The other more fundamental problem is they could all be channeling each other. So that, for example, I'll give you an example. Tom Hanks, everyone thinks he's a pedophile. Everyone seems to think he's a pedophile. If you track down the origin of that belief, you see where it comes from, but you also would not want to stake your life on it being true, even though you say it is kind of creepy. And so trying to get to truth is really difficult. It's hard enough anyways, right? If you ask, what's going on in Ukraine, try to get the truth out of that story, right? And that story, you have people trying to help you. This other story, you got people trying to stop you.
If you look at, there's been bold claims about, I guess, the pedophiles in Washington, D.C., or how prolific pedophilia is amongst the elites. If you get to the root of it, is it just that these people are sociopaths and this is an expression of the power that they have? They manage to climb these fields, and, maybe there's more of a pedophilic nature that most of us subdue, and these people are actually have the opportunities to, or is there some sort of a demon devil worship thing that these people are actually brought into worshiping some other entity from kind of delving into the topic? Or is it just blackmail that these people get compromised and then, get stuck in this alternative horrific lifestyle? What do you kind of see as the root of the pedophile that might exist amongst the elites?
Sort of all of the above, actually. So one thing that makes it complicated. So the reason I'm interested in it is because I found myself asking the question, why the hell would that person do that, right? Why would you open the southern border, right? And the answers that I would get seem so superficial. To get voters. I go, you don't know what they're going to do. I don't buy that argument. There's something, and why would you take the basic principles that define who we are and throw them under the bus to get a couple of voters, right? That just doesn't make sense to me. So I started looking for the gravitational force that was pulling people towards making decisions that made no sense to me. And I got on this pedophile theme. Now, let me give you some stats so that you understand the magnitude of it. Depending on who you ask, whether it's a FBI number, CIA number, international, organizations for missing and abused children, national organizations, you name it, they all cite very, very large numbers globally, between 1 million and 8 million, 10 million kids disappearing. Now, and I don't know why this year it all of a sudden picked up, but now there's hardly a newscaster who has not referred to trafficking, right? Everyone has referred to trafficking. And now the challenge, the gauntlet I throw down is I say, okay, now name a famous person who's been prosecuted for trafficking. And if you say, well, I don't know any, and you go, well, if 1 to 10 million kids are disappearing a year and you don't know anybody, really? So there's this odd thing where you see it all the way up to the point of rescuing handfuls of kids, catching handfuls of traffickers. Those are not important to the story to me. What's important to the story to me is that there's a guy named Ted Gunderson, who I didn't fully trust at first, but I've done some digging, and it turns out he was really big in the FBI, really big in the FBI. And in 1990, he said a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid will bring 50,000 on the open market. You're not selling these kids into trailer parks. You're not selling these kids to guys driving, vans with free candy written on the side. And so the question is, where are they going? Who's getting them? And what's the purpose? Now, I believe that it's all of the above. I think there are pedophile networks. I think there's huge amounts of blackmail. I think the blackmail actually starts out with, first they corrupt you, then they give you power. So once you're in power, you're harder to corrupt, I think, than before you're in power. Again, a lot of puzzle pieces, little anecdotes where you say that puzzle piece by itself is troubling. And that is, like, for example, a guy named Janda, who was undersecretary of something in the health. He was an orthopedic surgeon, prominent guy. He did an interview within the last year or two, and at least that's when I saw it. And he said, I was told not to go to an inside party, a private party in DC when I got to DC by a grizzled veteran. And I said, why? And he said, because you'll wake up in the morning groggy, not knowing what happened, and you'll have a Polaroid of you with a 5-year-old pinned to your chest. And I'm going, oh, and then you start reading shit written by the number 3 at the Vatican saying that the entire global geopolitical system is run by pedophiles. The number 3 at the Vatican. What did they do to him? They excommunicated him. Then you start reading about the deep crap. So as soon as you get into the pedophilia, you end up hitting Satanism fast and unavoidably. And as a consequence, you can't dig into it without hitting the Satanism, and hitting the Satanism is where your head just detonates because it's so surreal. And there appear to be it appears to be, it's a religion. I did a podcast with a guy who talked about that. He knew a ton. He's a minister and has 15 startup companies, right? There's an interesting resume for you. And he knew a ton, and he said Satanism's the fastest growing religion in the world right now. And so there's things like Frazzle Drip, where it's claimed that Anthony Weiner's laptop is filled with horrific footage of horrifically powerful people doing horrific things to children, like skinning them and stuff like that. Really bad stuff. And famous people like Hillary Clinton. Now, again, true, not true? I don't know. Has anyone released Anthony Weiner's laptop? No, we know that much, right? And we're not going to get it either. We are not going to get Anthony Weiner's laptop. But even Sidney Powell said, look, you give up Anthony Weiner's laptop, 98% of the government would collapse. So 9 cops supposedly went through the laptop. These are 9 cops with name, rank, serial number, rank, you name it. And they're all dead. They're all dead.
Whoa. By
name. It's not just rumors of 9 cops. Now, what I can tell you is there is no cop saying, oh, I'll be number 10. Let me see that thing, right? And so, and this is why it's been so hard to write, because it's so soul ripping. Yet I go back to 1 to 10 million kids a year disappearing, and no one can point to a consumer. Now, you can find them. For example, Nickelodeon was a pedophile hangout. Disney seems to have a fundamental pedophile problem, not just because there's kids at Disney and therefore there's pedophiles at Disney, but rather endemically to the Disney organization. And again, could be wrong, but the data starts piling up, and you see someone from Nickelodeon who does jail time, gets out, and then gets hired by Disney, right? And you go, wait a minute. You wouldn't hire that guy.
All right. So
then you dig into Satanism, and they're famous Satanists. There's famous Satanists.
All right. So I got a bunch of follow-up questions, but let's start with
Fire.
this. I remember once in high school, we lived in this dormitory at this private school, and I used to graffiti the walls a lot with Fujo, which stood for Fuck You, Joe. He was the head dorm counselor. Right. And I finally stopped doing this when one day I had to see the poor janitor have to repaint the walls. And I was like, well, I don't want to make this guy's life any more
Right.
miserable. So why am I doing this? And that's just stupid teenager stuff. But if anyone was around when I was doing it, I made them do it also so that they couldn't tattle on me. So I wonder if amongst the elites, if committing atrocities on that, which you had said, it so ingratiates them into the evil club that there's no turning back, because if anyone saw what they did, you know, they would be despised by all of society. And so they're kind of almost not in a spiritual sense, but corrupting their own soul and entirely buying in for power. And that perhaps there is no actual spiritual element there other than kind of what's rational and we can see in our world of, you are going to trade, like, you do not care about morality. You're joining our club over here, and here's kind of the price for joining our club is us knowing that you're entirely all in and you're not going to rat us out, and that you're in on our power game. Or there is that these people seem to either believe in some other entity that seems to like this darkness, or they've actually corresponded with such a dark entity. I seem to just prefer what's rational to me, so I would go more with the A camp of these are people that don't have our same morality, and they want to ensure that you will participate and not out them because of the social consequences of being completely amoral. But I'm curious what your take is on that.
Well, I think it's all of the above. So I think there's some who develop a taste for it. I think there's a I reached out to a very famous journalist. I don't want to name him because it was a DM. And he had mentioned Bernie Sanders in some somewhat dark light. And I said, there's a video out there of a woman who was a survivor, and she was told she told the interviewer that she was present when there was a senator who was being coerced and said, look, you're either going to have sex with this 5-year-old kid, and don't worry, many have had sex with this kid, the kid will be fine, or we're going to kill these 3 kids. You make the call right here, right now. That's it. You make the call. We're going to kill these kids right in front of you. And she says, I've never seen a guy so destroyed by this. And he had sex with a 5-year-old. And this is a survivor. And she was there, she says. Now, I don't know if any of this is true. And then the person pushed her and said, well, who was the senator? And she said, Bernie Sanders. Now, was Bernie being immoral, or was Bernie caught in a situation? Sophie's choice, right? Annika Lucas is a famous trafficked woman. There's some very famous ones who for dozens of years have been telling the same stories over and over. And I've listened to a ton of them, in part to see if I can pick up inconsistencies. And Annika's famous, and she did a Patrick Bet-David interview. And Patrick Bet-David is no slouch of an interviewer. And he had done his homework, and she talked about spending a lot of time with a very rich, powerful person. And he starts leaning in on her, starts throwing her data about knowing who he is. And she didn't want to go there. And then he finally says, was it David Rockefeller? And she starts crying and shit. And then she says, this was not the deal. We did not agree to talk about this. And then she finally said, yes, it's David Rockefeller. Now, the inconsistency I picked up was that she said she didn't know who he was. The problem I have is that she was in his house a ton by her own admission, and there's servants and everything. And then the question is, did she never hear the name? There's something that didn't, but I'm not sure, because she was so off her game already, spilling her guts. The other thing is, the guys who rat out the pedophiles tend to rat out dead ones. I think for obvious reason, they don't want to get whacked. I was on a Zoom call with Andrew Bridgen, who's been calling him out. And I tried to get him to name some names, and he wouldn't. But he's publicly stating, he says, look, I gave the data MI5, MI6. They don't, just crickets, just nothing. Andrew Bridgen was an MP in the British Parliament. He says, I got nothing. I gave them all the data they needed, nothing. So I think the royal families in Europe are all fucked up. Did you see the David Gergen interview by Alex Jones from decades ago? It's an amazing. I have not. Oh, it's an amazing interview. So Alex Jones does a hit job on Gergen. Now Gergen is, the Sunday morning famous, Sunday morning news show guy, big guy, sort of Billy Crystal level. And Alex Jones jams a mic under his face and says, do you go to Bohemian Grove? And Gergen handled it as poorly as you could possibly handle it. And he says, it's none of your business. I go, oh, may not be the answer. And Jones keeps leaning in and talks about Satanism and shit. And Gergen saying it's none of your business, and you were there and you shouldn't have been there. And I'm going, you really needed coaching on how to handle Alex Jones here. And when Jones finished the interview, and he got Gergen dead to rights. If you want to Google this, it's trivial to find. Jones turns to his film crew and goes, yes, like this, because he'd gotten them. So he got Gergen to essentially admit that they do all sorts of satanic shit at Bohemian Grove. And this is filled with presidents and senators and CEOs and shit, and Gergen. And so it's a world that it's almost like you've been told that the world is run by 9-foot zombies who walk around invisible at night or something, and you don't believe it. And then all of a sudden you see the schlieren of a 9-foot zombie, and you go, "Holy crap, that's true!" It's that strange.
So just to work backwards a little bit, you had said that the reason why the pedophilia storyline kind of fits a puzzle is a nice puzzle piece that fits in is because there's a lot of government policies that otherwise make no sense. And I think immigration is a good example, and that it seems obvious to me that the Biden administration was doing everything it could to bring as many people over the border as it possibly could. And I guess that's an interesting theory that that they're not just trying to bring in voters because they can't predict how they're going to vote. And I'd be curious, this is kind of an ADD side point, but the congressional seats given to more liberal areas that they get moved into. But let's just shelve that for a second. That's just my ADD. What are some other government policies that you think pedophilia explains that otherwise it just makes absolutely no logical sense? But if you insert that puzzle piece in, that they're all, secret pedophiles, that suddenly that brings clarity to it.
Well, that's the big one. And don't forget, with this southern border, there literally are NGOs who are warehousing these kids, right? This is a government-sponsored trafficking operation. I did a 2.5-hour Zoom call to a group that I'm with, this Zoom group, and about 2 hours in, a CIA guy shows up. And I go, what? And the guy runs it, says, oh, he's been a friend for 25 years. And he then talked about trafficking and the role of the CIA in trafficking and shit like that. So what else? Things like wars. Let's go with wars, right? If you really want someone to sign off on something, the Ukraine war made no sense to me. I think it was completely and utterly avoidable. And I think that someone desperately wanted us. The other thing is, you look at all the grooming and the transgender and all the crap that occurred throughout the last 4 years at the highest level of intensity. It really looked to me as though it was a concerted, well-funded effort to destroy the United States. So if I were China or whatever, or a globalist, let's say I were a globalist, and I thought the whole world should be run as one unique entity. Who's in my way? Well, Trump, United States in general, right? We tend to be pretty autonomous. Putin, Orban, right? Who are the guys who've taken the most grief from the globalists? Trump, Putin, Orban, Meloni, Italy, right? These are the rebels are the ones taking the most guff. And so if I wanted to destroy the United States, you can't pull battleships up to the shore and start shooting at us, right? What you do is you get us to destroy ourselves. And by that model, we're doing a wonderful job until Trump showed up. Now, I am still entertaining the idea that Trump is just a professional wrestler and he's doing his role, right? He's Hulk Hogan and supposed to be the good guy, and I can't rule that out. I'm watching very carefully to make sure that he makes sense. And what I'll tell you is we're not going to get the Epstein files. I bet a paycheck on that one. And
I agree with you, but
why'd they blow it so badly? Why'd they blow it so badly? I think here's what I think. I think that they were sufficiently out of touch that they thought bringing forth Epstein's black book, which turns out to have been on the internet since 2015 or something, that would end that discussion. And they didn't realize that there's 10 bazillion of us who already know about it and already knew the names, and that just made them look like assholes. And I think they totally miscalculated the ability to put down the Epstein case. Now, things like January 6th, we're going to get anything? We're going to get anything about the Vegas shootings? Going to get anything about the Trump assassinations? We're going to get anything about, there's, you name it. There's not a narrative in the United States that I don't think has bullshit slathered all over it.
I agree 100%. I predicted that the Epstein stuff wasn't coming out just by the fact that they were talking about the client list and they weren't talking about the safe, or they weren't talking about the sweetheart deal. It just didn't seem to me like they were being serious. The only thing that's interesting, I didn't even understand why they were bringing it up if they weren't serious about it. And just even if Trump turns out to, I'm neutral on Trump, which we can also get into. But even if Trump turns out to be mostly good, and when I say mostly good, I think what he might be good on is the Russia-Ukraine war. I think he's good on immigration. I think he's good on tech censorship. I think he was good on getting rid of central bank digital currencies. I think Trump's got some good in him. I think when it comes to economics, he's a disaster. And I think when it just becomes to being owned by Israel, he's a disaster as well. And on that note, I think the best working theory is that Epstein was some sort of an intelligence asset with some sort of a connection to Israel. And so when I look at Kash Patel, who also seems to be in the same lane of very good on every issue except for blanket support for Israel, I do not see the current administration actually having an interest in, showcasing the Epstein story.
So we talked a little bit in advance about directions going. I have a sort of a personal gag order light on Israel-Palestine, in part because it's so complicated. To me, Ukraine's simple. Israel-Palestine is complicated. I'm also on a university campus, so no matter what stance I take, I'm going to get my head blown off. And on top of it, I just don't think I can get my brain around. I tried to understand the Middle East. I've read books and books on the Middle East, and I'll never get within a factor of 100 of someone like Scott Horton, who knows this shit. What I can tell you is I was talking to a Canadian intelligence guy who actually spent time in Israel, and he said, you can't understand the shit you're trying to understand without reading Mearsheimer's book, The Israel Lobby. Right? Now, I do not want to dig into Israel-Palestine, because if I've got a gag order, what good does it do? It's like learning some language that no one else in the world speaks. But I've now essentially read, I'm almost done with the Israel Lobby, and the conclusion is, here's my stance, my public stance on Israel. We could make an argument for backing Israel strongly, militarily. Mearsheimer does not make that argument, I should add. We could make it based on economics. We could make it based on oil. We could make it based on morality, if you wish. What I want to know is that we're making it based on what's best for us. And if it's a moral argument that we think is best for us, then so be it, right? Now, all the things I just said, I know your brain is spinning, going, not that, not that, not that. That's fine. What I also am confident is that we'll never know if we're making it what's in our own best interest. We will simply not know. We can make arguments that it's not in our interest. We can make arguments that it is in our interest. We will not know. The Israel lobby is too powerful. AIPAC's too powerful. And if someone wants to listen to this and say, "Oh, Dave, you're an anti-Semite," come at me. You're going to lose some fucking teeth, right? Because I'm tired of that argument. If you have to be able to criticize government, because I guarantee you show me a government, I'll show you evil. Right? I'll show you grift. I'll show you corruption. I'll show you bad behavior. And if we can't criticize Israel, the government, without being accused of criticizing the religion. And I was on a signal call with a guy who was supposedly a deep state spook cyber expert, who I thought had an unstable personality. I was on like 3 signal calls with him. And on the third one, it just blew the fuck up, because he was just, Jews or Israel, Israel or Jews. There's no difference.
It's
I
such
said,
nonsense.
it's nonsense, right? And so I sort of tiptoed. I said, look, I have got to be able to criticize the government. So I went in without being antagonistic. I went in tiptoeing, and I said, look, I don't support anything the Bush administration did. I'm an American, but I don't support our government, and I've got to be able to take that stance. And he starts ripping me. So finally I said, fuck you, and hung up. What scares me is I never figured out if he was a grandiose narcissist who created this fake world because he was involved in so much shit, supposedly. Or what scares me more is that he's real and batshit crazy guys like this are calling the shots. But the Israel lobby by Mearsheimer's got balls the size of cantaloupes. I do not know how that guy wrote that book. Because he and Steve Waltz, who's also a big swinging dick in that world, they hammer Israel. They hammer the lobby.
You know, I have not read that book yet, but Mearsheimer's been a great voice on the Ukraine war.
He has.
I found him in that coverage, and I've been, listening to him religiously.
You should interview him. I've had a couple of email exchanges with him, just if for no other reason to support him. There's about 40 or 50 guys who I found really useful when I was writing about the Ukraine war. And it was really obvious to me that the Ukraine war I have reached the point where within an error bar, I give 100% of the blame to NATO, period. And it's not to say Putin's not a tough guy, and it's not to say that he's done everything perfectly, but this war did not have to exist if it were not for NATO, period.
I agree 100%, and the lives that were lost for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Millions.
While we had to hear in America that they're winning and that this is morality and we have to protect borders and Putin's going to take over the entire country, it was nonsense on the same magnitude of COVID. And
everything they said was lies. Yeah. Everything we were told was lies.
Yeah, and at a minimum, every one of those media personalities should be losing their jobs because, I just, how long can you spend on the air saying things that are completely not true, pretending like you're the voice of morality while people are just dying for absolutely no reason?
So let's say Trump follows through and basically ceases to support Ukraine, which supporting Ukraine would be ending the war, of course, but ceases to provide any more money, weapons, things like that. Is Europe bluffing, or does Europe step up and start and continue this fiasco on its own, in your opinion?
I'll lay out some of my thoughts on this because I think it's almost putting betting percentages on it. I can't say
exactly
for certain.
Right.
It's nearly flipping a coin. I think if Europe decides to continue to support Ukraine, that has to be the end of NATO, because if we're saying, hey, we don't want to have anything to do with this fight, and they want to go through with it, then we can't be backing them up because then we're still involved. And I think if it goes in that direction, it's the end of the world order the way that we used to have it, because I do think that there is some sort of it's amazing to me how Europe has just kind of remained. Let me actually reframe this. And this was a topic that I wanted to get into with, what Elon Musk has exposed with the NGOs. But I feel like in America, we're kind of in the boiling pot of water. We're the frog. And sometimes it's hard to kind of get the scope of the degree of full-scale socialism that actually existed in this country and how much wealth was wealth is a very good signal for, let's just go loosely with what people appreciate, because usually if something's generating a lot of money, we think, oh, the market must be interested in that. And now we have a question of, well, how much government money? This is kind of what was going on with the Jackson Pollocks and the Andy Warhols, that the CIA was buying that up to make it seem like there was more of a interest in American art. And now you start having a question as all these anchors are getting fired.
I've not heard that story.
Oh, you got to look this one up, because I think it's like, I think it so showcases the government's playbook that basically during the Cold War, the CIA started buying up the Jackson Pollocks and they were buying up the Andy Warhols to make it seem like high art was America was winning, like the modern art
the art world's up to its ass in the trafficking.
Interesting.
Because it turns out to move art across the border, if it's valuable, the last thing you want is some customs guy cranking it open with a crowbar.
So they leave it alone. You could say,
And
hey, that's a Van
so
Gogh.
they have mechanisms to go around customs. And so, you know, the guy who sold the balloon art, a guy named Coons,
I do remember
$250
this guy.
million balloon. First and foremost, you know, Hunter Biden's not selling a lot of paintings now, right?
The
When
same
you
way
buy,
Hillary Clinton's not getting a lot of Saudi Arabian donations either.
that's right. But Coons was selling balloon art for 250 million bucks, which is a lot of money. But a spectacular mechanism to move money where you want to move it to if he turns out not to be just a balloon artist, right? And it turns out when you track his roots down, you go, wait a minute, he's hanging out with sketchy motherfuckers. I mean, he is really. This is so the connections made between Coons and the our world and the trafficking world are pretty interesting. I'm not 100% confident. I'm not 100% confident in any fact. I mean, I'm going to stick with 2 + 2 = 4, but beyond that, I get lost.
Go just to give you a straight answer. I'm going to guess that Europe doesn't want that heat, and the reason being,
I think so too,
is that I think that we're on the horizon of a financial reckoning, and I think you agree with me on that. I think the Feds have been creating asset bubbles basically for the last, you know, since we've gone off the gold standard. And since the last financial crisis, the Fed has dumped a lot of money into the system that hasn't washed out yet, and we haven't really come down from that. And the idea that now, while we're kind of in a bad financial spot globally, Europe is going to want to take on the responsibility of its entire security and be at odds with the United States of America and not have all central banks in lockstep. I think that that's too risky for the elites globally, and that now's not the kind of time to be playing those games. And so my guess is that we were unsuccessful in opposing Russia right now, and there's almost going to be like, I'm going to call it an elite flight to safety, and that I don't think that there's enough wiggle room right now economically for Europe to want to break up with the United States of America. I don't think that the leaders quite want this heat, and I think Trump's aggressive enough that he's willing to push people on it.
Do you
this is my first time I'm thinking about this, though, but that's kind of my gut reaction, is that you can flip a coin on this, but I think if the United States walks away, France and England, they might play a little bit of a game for a bit of like, hey, we're going to step it up, but they don't want direct war with Russia.
I think right now it's just a bunch of bullshit while they're trying to get the United States not to back away. And for example, Britain was talking about putting 30,000 troops in Ukraine. Supposedly they have 60,000 troops total. Right? That's just nuts, right? You're lying. You're fibbing at a profound level when you say shit like that. And then I saw a great meme that said it was about Germany, and it said, let me see if I got this right. I want to get this on paper. You want us to build an army and attack the Soviet Union? Really? Attack Russia? Really? I just want to be clear on this point, right? And the answer is no. But I can't rule out the possibility that Europe's about to turn into another bar fight. They do it all the time. They've been doing it since the Roman Empire, right? I mean, since the invention of the nation state, Europe's been brawling. There's a bunch of brawlers. There are a bunch of hooligans. It's like a big soccer game over there. At the end of the game, and they just start beating on each other. And so I wouldn't be shocked if the real carnage showed up in the middle of Europe sooner rather than later.
Well, like Italy fighting Germany, or
I don't know. You know, I did a bunch of reading this year on World War II. And what I realized is I didn't understand World War II at all. I'm not sure I still do, but I know that I didn't before. And at the beginning of the war, there were alliances shifting all over the place. It wasn't just like good guys here, bad guys there, let's go at it. It was not obvious who was going to be on what team in the late 30s. And you can make the case that we should have joined up with the Germans and fought the Soviets. You can easily make that case. And we didn't, but in part that's because it turns out FDR's right-hand man as chief of staff was a Soviet spy. And so FDR, who I think must have had Soviet ties. That's my conclusion. He couldn't have been so oblivious based on all the reading I've done. I've read a bunch of books by Dinah West and Sean McMeekin, and FDR's ties with Stalin were, FDR's hated by the right because of his economics. I think where he should be hated is his geopolitics.
Well, it was claimed, we had a historian friend of the show, Gary Richide, who came on after reading. You had written about this book in your end of your recap, but I think it was Stalin's War. One of the claims in that book is that after we created the atom bomb, we actually just shipped it to them, which then set up the next, 40 years of geopolitical conflict, is that we literally just sent them the technology.
Right. And the other thing is, I mean, Stalin, as the story goes, called all the shots in World War II. We landed at Normandy because that's where Stalin wanted us to land. Stalin's massive, if you ask who won World War II, it's a very complicated question. You can say, who beat the Germans? I would argue that, the West, not the Soviets. It turns out apparently their army was totally incompetent. They lost a lot of people. So the war of attrition was enormous, but they sucked as an army. And we dumped something like 20 times the amount of armaments into the Soviet Union than we dumped into England during World War II, to give you an idea. That Lend-Lease program was a load of crap. It was political garbage. Our Lend-Lease program to Stalin was off the charts. And so Stalin won World War II because if you get the end of the war, you go, what did the United States have that they didn't have before the war? And the answer is nothing. What did Europe have? Well, half of Europe was missing now. Stalin had it, right? What did Japan have? Nothing. Stalin got half of Europe and everyone else got hosed. And so
I guess we walked away, as the dollar with the reserve currency. So
we did, and we walked away having not been burned by the war and having one thing. I got in an argument with an economist, and he said I said the Depression ended after the war was over. And I made the case, and he said, now the GDP, the numbers show the GDP grew, blah, 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 during the war. And I thought about that for actually a number of years. And then I finally realized, I go, no, because the GDP, you're calling GDP, was making bombs and ships and shit like that. And it's not GDP if you send it out and it blows the fuck up, right? It's GDP when you make something that lasts 20 years. So the shelf life of something should go into the GDP calculation. A bomb has a very small shelf life, and so we did, and we also went deeply into debt. So if you go deeply into debt, you can pretend you're not in the Depression, but you're going deeply into debt, which means you're pulling savings, you're pulling production forward, and you're going to pay later. And now, what saved our bacon was the wealth creation of the United States during World War II. Was we learned on steroids what Henry Ford had just taught us at the start, and that is how to make shit in big quantities efficiently. So the productivity of the United States soared, and we brought that to the post-war world. And if you look at, my son gave me as a birthday present, he gave me a copy of Life and Time magazine from the date that I was born.
That's a fun gift.
It was a fun gift. He's a very clever gift giver. And you read Life magazine, it was all consumer goods. It was all pictures of chicks with vacuum cleaners and dishwashers and new dish soaps. And Time magazine was all smokestack ads, Alcoa, General Motors, things like that, just showing what a phenomenal juggernaut of a machine we were. Curiously, what was missing? No cigarette ads.
That is interesting.
I was shocked. No cigarette ads.
All right. I love the ADD of this. I want to come back to NGOs in a second, but while we're on the topic of World War II, I have some follow-up questions. Let's start with this one. In your opinion, if the United States never got involved in World War II and we let the Germans just continue to duke it out with the Russians, we didn't provoke the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor with whatever we did with the oil embargoes, and we just let Japan and China duke it out over there, where do you think where would we be now? Like, if
I don't think you can answer that question. That question has so many unknowable paths. I don't think you can know. There's a more microscopic version of that question would be like, what if we just didn't get into it with Japan, right? But even that's unknowable. One thing is losing to the United States seems to be a good start to a rebirth.
Oh, that's interesting, because we almost impose on you a better economic system of that your
Right.
country is not allowed to go to war, which takes away the the trap of the United States.
I know.
We waste
I know.
all of our money on that.
I know.
So
I know.
if someone could almost come in and United States the United States and keep us from blowing all of our resources on wars for no reason, then maybe we could have the prosperity that Japan and Germany. Well, I wouldn't really point to Germany. And Japan.
Well, Germany had prosperity too. Germany became a juggernaut. Here's one of the mysterious things I'm laboring over right now is that if you ask anyone who seems to understand the German economy, they say it's a mess, just a complete mess. The DAX looks like NVIDIA. The DAX has just been going hyperbolic, and I go, how is the German stock index soaring while Germany's sucking balls? And I don't understand.
And is there any? I mean, usually in the U.S., it means the Fed has given money to corporations that they could buy their own stocks, or they've
I don't know
somehow inserted a bunch of money in.
You know, they should be in the doldrums. They really should be, and somehow it's like an NFT or something at this point. It just doesn't make sense anymore.
All right, and then last thing on the topic of World War II, I've got a project in mind I'm starting to delve into. I've read The Creature from Jekyll Island and a lot of the books about the creation of the Federal Reserve. And now I'm starting to kind of research the characters that potentially, actually own I'm listening to this book about JP Morgan. I'm very interested kind of in the Rothschild storyline, because
I knew that's where you were headed with the Morgan. As soon as you mentioned Morgan, I said, here it comes. All
right, and I'm not a student of history, but I just complete tinfoil hat theory on world history is that as the kingships of World War I fell, the Rothschilds and other ones figured out how we could have governments that they could control through CIAs and other, organizations, that they could private individuals could do a better job of basically thwarting the kings and really running the world. Real tinfoil hat theory there. The Rothschilds, though, which go back, I guess, to being the lender to Napoleon and getting in early in the fractional reserve banking racket. So kind of because I know you teased a short line in your World War II piece that perhaps Hitler in some part was opposing the Rothschilds in his ethnic cleansing. But I'm curious to know, and there's just the storyline of, the Treaty of Versailles and what was imposed on Germany and that couldn't possibly work. I'm curious to know, like, kind of, in your opinion, just like the history of the Rothschild family and how it kind of fits into even the pedophile elites as we speak of, or kind of the globalists, or like, are they really the wizard behind the curtain?
Well, it gets complicated. So the first reading I ever did on them was Neil Ferguson's book many, many years ago called The Rothschilds, right? And he basically tells a story of dissipated wealth. Now, I have a suspicion that Neil might have been talking someone's book for them. I wouldn't be shocked. I've wondered where the wealth goes. Here, let's start with the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church has been accruing wealth for 2,000 years. And if you look down in downtown Ithaca and look across from up on the hill and you see church steeples and stuff, you go, how many acres does the Catholic Church own in the city of Ithaca? Right? It's at some point and every time you died, where'd you leave your money? You left it to the church, right? You might have left it to your brother or sister or wife or something, but some percentage of people just kept leaving it to the church. And so if you were to tell me that the largest financial organism in the world is the Catholic Church, I would have no trouble believing that, at least as a credible theory, because they've been accruing wealth nonstop. And it's not like they spend it. Right? I can't, where would it be going besides just accruing? The Rothschild story is interesting, where I've seen claims pretty recently, actually, claims that J.P. Morgan's massive empire was 17% owned by Morgan and 83% owned by the Rothschilds, and he was just a pawn. That story is a pretty common story. I've wondered where the Medici money went, right? The Medici, there's a great, they call the Medici archives, where there's literally millions of documents, and they're.
What is that? I'm not familiar with the Medici.
Well, the Medici was the Italians, right? The papal states and all that crap. So it would be tied to the church. And the Medici was 350 years of basically a ruling family in Italy. And then the question is, where'd all the money go? And where'd the wealth go? And sometimes you can destroy wealth, but sometimes it just kind of morphs into a new shape. So, for example, like the Vatican, you got the Vatican, the church, and you got the Vatican, the financial entity. And they're potentially two totally different things at this point, right? So I wonder where these great financial empires disappeared to. When BCCI, the number 12th largest bank in the world, got toppled by virtue of the fact we discovered that they were bankers to every criminal, every drug lord, every CIA operative, every you name it, and somehow they lost control of their narrative. The money, I think, all ran over to HSBC, and I mean, HSBC at one point was handling so much drug money that they literally had drive-through windows that they rebuilt so you could shove boxes of money through the drive-through window. And this was only about 10 years ago. This was not distant past. So the Rothschilds could be huge, as you hinted at. Lynn Rothschild, for example, has been implicated as part of the satanic pedophilic Rothschild family. That then starts crisscrossing with the Freemasons and all the weird, wacky shit tied with that. And again, you can go bananas reading this stuff, but then all of a sudden there'll be a connection that you make and you go, oh my God, that's a strange one. One of my favorite stories, here's a great story. JFK Jr., who I think was on the Clinton kill list, because Hillary wanted that Senate seat that he was going to go for. He was on Leno. Have you heard this story? He was on Jay Leno and he got interviewed. And Leno was talking about his magazine, George. Now, JFK Jr. would have been a lock for the presidency, right? He was the most handsome Kennedy in history. He was articulate. He had everything. He was JFK's son, right? This guy would have walked into the White House. So he's talking about George, and then Leno hints at something, and Kennedy pulls out this piece of paper, and he says, "I knew we were going here." And you can search Jay Leno JFK Jr. on YouTube. You'll find it. And he opens up this piece of paper that's a poem of a 9-year-old girl. And he says, I am going to burn in hell for reading this, right? And he's laughing. He and Leno obviously know where this is going. And he reads this poem, and within 2 lines, and it's by a 9-year-old girl, within 2 lines, it's patently obvious that this girl's been trafficked. I've read enough about trafficking that there are certain traits that just are inescapable. She opens with, I am a really yummy 9-year-old girl. And then she says, yummy in a weird kind of way. And then she goes, I am like a big piece of dough with all the toppings on it. And I go, holy shit, could you be more trafficked than this girl, right? Who is the 9-year-old girl? Monica Lewinsky.
Whoa.
Right? So there's one of those puzzle pieces where I go, I don't even need to know where that fits into the puzzle.
That's
to
so
realize.
Weird. So he had a poem from Monica Lewinsky?
When she was 9, so she was trafficked. So then the whole Monica Lewinsky story just blows up into a holy fuck. We had no idea what was going on there.
Yeah.
And then you find these things, and I go, like, for example, the Satanist Marina Abramovic. She's the most famous Satanist in the world. They wrote up in the Atlantic Monthly, if you search Marina Abramovic, you'll see her throwing dinner parties with cadavers, fake cadavers, hopefully fake cadavers. I'm not positive they're always fake. Um, uh, Pictures of her with a skinned goat's head, sitting on entrails of slaughtered mammals. I mean, this chick is a Satanist. They're just flat out a Satanist, right? She's a Satanist like Liberace's gay, right? That level of Satanist. And Marina has ties with the Clintons, has ties with all these prominent people. Marina, I'm thinking you're too deep now, Dave. You're reading shit. You're wasting your time. There's something crazy here. She gets above the fold. It gets announced that Zelensky is going to appoint her into a position that puts her as being in charge of the Ukrainian school system. And I go, boom. My head just blew up again. Now, you don't put a Satanist in charge of the school system. Now, when they scoop up the kids, I keep going back to this because you got me started. When they scoop up the kids, it's called harvest season. So, for example, the Clinton Foundation, I was on a Zoom call with an Army intelligence guy, a famous one. He got booted because he was a loudmouth. He was on the Zoom call. He seemed unfiltered. He could be faking my ass out. If he's good, he can lie to me too, right? But at the very end, I asked him about trafficking. He starts talking about Epstein. I go, well, we kind of have a beat on Epstein. He ran a pretty tight operation. He obviously was compromising people all over the world, stuff like that. I go, now, I'm interested in the darker shit. I said, let me ask you a simple question. I said, does the Clinton Foundation traffic children? Now, I knew the answer. This is one of those ones where I go, this one I would bet a paycheck on. This is not one of those I don't know things. It seems like it. This one I'd bet a paycheck on. And he says, oh, absolutely. You know how many people's head in this world would explode if you told them the Clinton Foundation was trafficking children? But Clinton Foundation members were thrown in Haitian jails and had to get bailed out by the Clintons. And it's all, search Laura Silsby. It's all over the news.
And they had like a perfect government name for the Haitian thing. Yeah, like the Haitian Clinton.
It's called harvest season. Now I wrote about harvest season with the Lahaina fires. Now I never got a read on it, but remember when Lahaina burned to the ground? Remember, USA Today estimated 750 kids were missing. Now, based on what we saw, you say, well, probably 748 of those are dead, right? I mean, when your kid's missing after that, you're not going to find that kid, right? You now try to find anything about Lahaina, you can't even find any evidence of a dead kid. The whole thing is covered. I don't know where the kids went. What was
the Lahaina fires? I don't remember this.
That was the Maui fires that burned, where they burned the whole town of Lahaina. And there's some very shaky shit. So a week ago, the guy who was the guy who was at high up in the police system in Vegas during the Vegas shootings, turns out to be high up in the police department in Lahaina at the Lahaina fires. And so when I wrote about it, I mentioned this. I said, but this doesn't mean anything. That could be luck. Well, it turns out he has now been connected with P. Diddy. And I go, that's a hat trick. That's getting too coincidental now. And so then you circle, but what does it mean? I go, I don't know. It means it's like, and there's voices in the attic and blood starts dripping down the walls. And what it says is, get the fuck out of that house. Right? I have to charge my headphones just a second.
But can you hear me while the headphones are charging?
Yeah, my headphones were dying. Can you?
Oh, okay. Well, we can go with the lower quality audio for a minute here. All right, so let's switch gears because the NGOs are a fascinatingly underreported topic. I know that Elon Musk has been saying it's wild that Congress can basically just fund NGOs, and then there's really, I mean, I mean, how much oversight is there of any of our funding when it floats to the Pentagon, or just about, you see all the green energy scams of how many failed energy projects there's been. So even when there's direct funding from government to an organization, a lot of that seems to just be a bottomless pit of wasted funds. Even in the best circumstances of just socialism of, hey, government's going to be funding this project because we think it's important. But then when you put in another middleman of, hey, we're just handing this money over to an NGO, and that's the beginning and end of the paper trail, and I don't think those NGOs ever have to come back into Congress to report the progress, or if the NGO's mission is even in the best interest of the United States people. So some of the examples of just NGOs that I'm aware of is there seems to have been a lot of NGOs working in South America, seemingly based off of what I've read, trying to get people or facilitating people coming over the border. There was also a storyline with Joe Biden on the way out that he put $20 billion into a bank account at, I forget what it was. Maybe it was Merrill. I forget where it was, which was supposed to be distributed to different green energy companies. You had another one with...
yeah, that's the one where they used a Titanic gold metaphor.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And then there was Stacey Abrams had a $2 billion NGO that she got to oversee.
Well, but see, here's where it gets really complicated. Stacey Abrams, they said she was affiliated with it. Now, affiliation could be anything.
You mean her cousin works there? Yeah, I guess that is a pretty loose term.
It could be they kicked 50 grand at her and took the rest. And you know, if you're going to get your underwear in a knot over Stacey Abrams scooping up 50 grand, you're going to go nuts.
Yeah, it's small potatoes of corruption. It's incredible to me, though. Just, you would think if I ran the newspaper and I had all the resources for journalism, the amount of coverage I would give to where's the government going, who these NGOs are, what their mission is, what they're actually working on, where the money goes, and there's zero. I mean, the first time that this is really even a storyline is last week. Elon Musk is on the news going, it's crazy that we're giving billions of dollars over to NGOs and no one knows where that money goes. I'm curious if this is something that you've come across in your research, and it kind of goes back to what I was ranting about before of not really being fully aware of just how much socialism exists in the United States, of how much money is going to, you know, the media companies for favorable coverage. We now know that money was going directly to Politico and the BBC. I can only imagine how much money existed in academia of grants such as from the NIH, but hey, you can't be opposing Fauci, or we want research that comes back and says that transgendering people is a good idea. So I'm curious if you've come across any research in this field, or if you've got any like scope of the problem of basically government money going directly to NGOs that could be completely working against, let's just say, the interest of the American people, or literally just be thrown into a trash basket of wasted funds so random individuals can be rich.
Well, you know, if you want to do one of Trump's sweeping EO type things, you could actually freeze every NGO and say, okay, we're gonna bring them back online as we convince ourselves they were money well spent. So you could literally put a freeze on all NGOs. And of course, that would then put a freeze on $1 trillion in a heartbeat, right? And I still can't convince myself that what we're getting a lot of headlines. I'm not convinced that the supposed numbers of dollars saved and stuff is anywhere near.
I'll tell you, if you've never read it, Mish Talk, he does really good work. I
read Mish all the time. Yeah.
Oh, so he would put out a blog recently that essentially, I think it was 90. It was either, I got two numbers in my head. It was 83% or 97%. No, maybe it was 92% overstated. 5%. What was it?
High percent, yeah.
Yeah, it was basically let's just go with 8%. 8 to 20% of the savings claim by Elon Musk was actually saved. And the scam that he was pulling, and this was an article that I skimmed, and I was like, I got to reread this one because it was like at the end of my work day of reading and I wasn't totally focused. But It was essentially the same way that they pull budget scams where, you know, they'll allocate money to be spent in 10 years from now in the budget, and then they just kind of report to you, well, here's the spending over next year, but it doesn't matter because you've actually increased it way more than that. You're just not accounting for it. So Elon Musk basically pulled the opposite, where there's grants given that then can be continued, renewed, or there's a max value to the grant, but that's not actually what was spent or what was like promised. You would know the grant process better than I do if there's truth to that claim where you kind of get an initial grant and then it can be re-upped. But apparently Elon Musk and his calculations was just assuming the maximum value on all of those. and so overstated the savings by, according to Mish, a large percentage.
So here's what I'll tell you that's astonished me. I actually talked to my class about it today. What I do know about is things like overhead, which is what Trump's been aiming at. And they said, overhead rate is 62%, and is Cornell's overhead rate is 62%. They want to cut it back to 15. What is astonishing me is that the universities are not getting out in front of this and saying, let me explain to you how this works, right? Because what I can tell you is that now there could be big grift in the medical schools where pharma's really got its hooks. What I can tell you is that to get grants in a normal academic setting, like in a chemistry building, you got to put your balls to the wall. It's hard to get. And I don't see, I see fundamentally sound R&D. I see people who are doing good work who are not getting funded, right? And so I can't see the grift from my perspective. I consulted for Pfizer for 20 years. I couldn't see the grift there either. Where the grift may exist in a big way is at the clinical trial stage, for example, which you totally pick up if you read The Real Anthony Fauci. Let's start with that one. If you then go to John Abramson's book called Sickening, he talks about rigging clinical trials, and that's all done at medical schools. And so the medical schools might be a scene of great corruption, and I'm just not tied to them, so I don't know. Here's what I can tell you. For example, if I get an NIH grant for $1 million, actually the biggest one I got was $3.5 million. On top of that is 62% for overhead. What does that cover? Well, it turns out that one of my former colleagues, when he was chair, did the math. He said the chemistry facility at Cornell is approximately 1/3 teaching, 2/3 research. So if you want to say, look, academia is doing government-sponsored research that's considered to be for the good of American industry, a number of drugs like Lyric and stuff have come out of academics. If you accept the model, which doesn't seem to be crazy to me, then what you're saying is that the 62% is to support the research part of the facility and the infrastructure of an academic setting. Now, what I'll tell you is that this colleague of mine said 2/3 of the building is research. If you actually take the gas and electric bill of Cornell's chemistry department and you take 2/3 of that bill, our overhead does not pay that bill. So that gives you an idea of how much more. And therefore, one's got to make the argument that it's getting subsidized by tuition dollars and stuff like that, right? It's coming from somewhere. But so universities should be getting out ahead of this and saying, look, it costs a fortune to run a research lab. And if you want to stop all research, but by the way, research in the United States is a crown jewel. And I wrapped up my research program last summer. I really don't think I'm saying this because I have a horse in the race. What I can tell you is that my research grants did not go up in quantity over the last 15 years. They've been fixed. So inflation has gutted what used to be much more generous grants. And they're hard to get. They're just really hard to get. They fund, the pay cut at, say, an NIH study section might be at the 10, 11, 12 percentile mark. That means almost 90% of the people applying aren't getting them.
So I know nothing of chemistry. I've basically failed high school chemistry. I think the teacher cheated for me on the Regents so that he could have less failures in the class. It's Chinese to me. In the research that you've done, I guess I guess what of value came out from it that you don't think the free market could have supported or have an interest in? I just don't know enough about academic research or the grant structure or what government gets out of the research that it puts in. But in the pharmaceutical companies, if you were to move the government from funding the initial research, I would assume that the pharmaceutical companies would have to take that on. They wouldn't just not be interested in, producing medicines. So the question kind of becomes, why is why do we have basically socialized research? Why is that kind of
Um,
a system of a system of the market that needs to be socialized?
so that's an offshoot of the Cold War. That's where it starts. So the whole Sputnik thing in the United States said we got to get ahead of the Soviets, technically
Did we
speaking. And
land on the
so
moon? That's an ADD, but that's an ADD one for you.
no, that's right. But that is the origin of it. So it
Right.
used to be, I have colleagues who, 6 decades ago, it was just very, very different the way you did your research program. And then in the 60s, they started really dumping serious money into academic science departments to do research. There are other models, clearly. And one of the potential advantages of the government-sponsored model as opposed to the pharma-sponsored model is that you're more likely to do a little bit more blue sky things than if Pfizer's paying your tab. If Pfizer's paying your tab, you're going to be Pfizer's bitch at some level. And so then the question is, so really big things that come out that win Nobel Prizes and change society, many of those they didn't come out of the private sector. They actually came out of some blue sky grant where the guy was out their ways. Now, for example, what did I do? So I went into a field that was actually considered dead when I entered it. And I said, look, the field's been dead for 20 years. There's a lot of things to be done here that have been left undone because of that. And it turned out Pfizer pharma became my biggest consumer. So I studied how chemistry works. You can either study how to make things or how things work. And no one had been studying how it works. And a lot of shit had happened, but no one knew how it worked. And so my job was to say, here's why the hell that's happening. And all of a sudden, Pfizer, Merck, companies like that. So I was consultant for Pfizer for 20 years. I was on Merck's long range steering committee, editor of a journal, things like that. And my NIH program director, one time I applied for a 4-year grant and they converted it to a 10-year grant, which you don't even ask for. And it has to do with a sustained level of high success rates. So that I said, okay, fuck it, give the guy 10, just let him go. And my program director said to me, he said, you are the poster child for why doing basic research benefits society. And it's because I was studying things that on the surface seemed at some level kind of maybe a little obscure that turned out to have a big impact on pharma. But you wouldn't have necessarily seen it coming. I kind of knew because I used to do stuff that was pharma-like. And so I kind of knew what my target audience was. I knew where I was aiming, even though I was going in a direction that didn't look right. So I saved DuPont Pharma and Bristol Myers Squibb and these guys based on some stuff. I saved them huge amounts of money by coming up with a better way to do things for them, things like that. So not everyone can make that claim. But I once read a proposal by a guy who won the Nobel Prize, and his opening line was we have saved pharma enough money that you could pay for my program for the rest of my life with room to spare. And so the idea is that there is great research being done here. A lot of the stuff that starts here ends up there. And you can say, why are we subsidizing pharma? I don't know. There are other ways to do it. But what it doesn't look to me is it doesn't look inefficient. Now, when I read something about like Elon finding, gender transformation of frogs or something, remember Alex Jones saying, oh, they're making gay frogs. Remember the gay frog story?
Of course.
Well, it turns out that what that story was about was some guy at Berkeley who was studying a drug called atrazine that was getting into the water supply. And where they first picked up the bad effects of atrazine was that the frogs were getting all fucked up. And they were showing sexual dysmorphism and dimorphism and stuff like that. And they said, so Alex unfortunately turned it into gay frogs. So transgender mice could actually be a legitimate study, right? That's one that gets a lot of press, right? Could be a legitimate study of asking why do people manifest what they're manifesting? Are they hormonal imbalances? Are they right? You could imagine it being a legitimate thing. One thing that I remember, there was a guy who used to, I can't remember, Proxmire. Proxmire used to find grants that he didn't like the sound of, and he'd hammer them. And one of them was like fist clenching in primates. But what they were studying was anger. And, angry people kill people and stuff like that. So, you could run a legitimate program trying to figure out what's the biochemical basis of anger.
So you're basically saying that even amongst some of the most extreme stories to showcase the wasted money,
could be getting presented wrong. Yeah,
it could be presented wrong. All right, I'm
the only guy I know of who's been saying this shit in the last 2 months while they're now. I laugh at this. I mean, I'm having a ball watching. But there's going to be a lot of collateral damage in academia. For example, did Columbia get $400 million frozen or canceled? Do you know?
I do not know.
So I read articles saying they frozen. I read articles saying they canceled. Freezing means you're not going to get it for a week until you straighten yourself out, and then we'll release the money to you. So you go, okay, I got the message. Cancel. I've been involved in budget cutting. You take $400 million out of Columbia's budget, it is going to devastate them.
So
now, people say, well, they got a $10 billion endowment. Every penny of that endowment is accounted for a purpose. So I'll donate money to the, Cornell's ornithology department because I'm a bird fan or something, right? I'm not, but my wife is. That money can't be used to pay salaries. That was donated. So endowments are these pockets of money. They're no more liquid than the buildings on campus. And so during 08-09, I sat in my office with the assistant provost of Harvard with a $35 billion endowment at the time. And he said, we don't know how we're going to make salary this month. And the reason was because the endowment's completely illiquid. Now, they got a lot of money, but, owning timberland in Ukraine is not the way to pay your salary. So
I got to ask, though, because, I guess during COVID, like half of the money that the government sent out left the country and was mostly spent on fraud. And then I look at all of the green energy investment and most of that fraud. If you've never read it, David Stockman's book, The Great Deformation, he's got a chapter over everyone who got the Obama money and it went under. And the most recent one was that California solar field, which was one of the pinnacle dream investments of Obama, went under. So do you find that specifically the funding that goes into academia is just better managed than general government funding, that there's less fraud and abuse there? Or is it just that you've kind of worked the academics in the circles that you've been in seem to make better use of the money?
Well, I can't speak. Cornell's got something like 110 departments.
Right.
So, and that doesn't even include the medical school. What I do know is that I can see places where Cornell spends a lot more than they used to. Part of the problem is getting money from the government's become very expensive. So up until now, if you wanted to accept federal money, all of a sudden you had to have way more accountants. You had to have DEI deans and all these things. And so the cost of running universities soared at some level beyond universities' control. Now, there's also an arms race. If you look out my window, you'll see new dorms. You go, well, they didn't have to have new dorms. Well, actually, the university's been growing in size, but they bulldozed some older dorms and built new dorms. Why? Because if we don't, the kids will go to Princeton. And so there's an arms race here. Now, on the bright side, as you walk down, I'm in George Fisher Baker Laboratory. I'm in the Olin Laboratory, which is by the Olin family. Next door is George Fisher Baker. He was a peer of J.P. Morgan. You go down the street, you got Seth Klarman's hall. You go down the street from there, you get Duffield Hall from PeopleSoft. You get Bill Gates's building a little bit further down. These are all buildings which were paid for by wealthy people rather than tuition. And so then the question is, at some point, here's where the university system, I think, could straighten itself out. I think you could have half the number of colleges. I don't think you should measure your success based on number of bachelor's degrees or whatever. And so if you're, like you said, you sucked in chemistry. If you're at some shitty school and you got a 500 on your SAT in English and you're majoring in English, you're probably wasting money, right? So I think you could cut out, half the schools in the country and instead send those guys to learn how to be plumbers and electricians and all sorts of shit we need. So the whole Trump model, right? Bring the jobs home. The schools I think you'd cut out would be from the middle. So I think the community colleges probably serve a very important purpose. And I think the elite colleges serve an important purpose. And I don't think that's being selfish. I think, when you aggregate some of the smartest guys in the country in a site, things happen.
I think there's a lot of kids that go to college and party because they're supposed to go to college.
Well, that's right.
And then they probably could have just started their job where they got the training for what they were doing right then and there. For example, I bullshit for a living. There were no college classes in bullshitting.
If you read Jonathan Haidt's books, Coddling the American Mind, The Righteous Mind, the most recent one is The Anxious Generation. The kids are now fucked up. And it's not their fault, but it is their problem and it is our problem. So their academic performance is way off. They don't know how to study. Their iPhones have biochemically altered them. Their attention spans have plummeted. And so you have any of my colleagues, they'll tell you the kids I'm teaching now just aren't what they used to be. And so we are receiving the brightest kids from the high schools that are not what they used to be. And I tell my class this. That makes me really popular, I should add. Look, it's not your fault, but if you don't learn to push away your phone, if you don't learn to push away your laptop, and you don't learn to go in the lab and do what you're supposed to do and not burn the day to texting your friends, you are going to not be as successful as you could have been. Now, that little pitch it's going to fall on deaf ears because they're biochemically altered now. This is really clear now. They're biochemically damaged. You can, they've done things like functional MRI scans on taxi drivers in London. And the lobe that it has to do with memory, because the taxi drivers had to remember so many goddamn things in London. It was so hard was humongous in these people because they had so exercised their memory. And so the bottom line is that I think the kids coming into college, they just aren't what they used to be. And that's a real problem. Now, on top of that, Cornell and every university in the country is now getting unionized, which means we're heading probably for a 40-hour work week. We're heading for kids who want to put a union rep between them and their advisor. I think we're heading for real trouble. I think what used to be the elite scientific organization, we own science at one point. We're going to give it up.
All right. So shifting topics just back to Elon Musk. I can't get a clean read on Elon Musk. There's a part of me that goes, hey, this guy's a defense contractor. And he's made a lot of money off of ins with the government and credit schemes for the earlier versions of Tesla. I think that he did us a big favor in terms of buying Twitter, and I think that really did change the scope of humanity in terms of restoring free speech to the internet. And also, I think that was a slick win of it might be the greatest move by a billionaire of getting good press for essentially purchasing, a public good. It's like the better version of owning the newspapers and the mistake that Bezos did when he bought the Washington Post. And now he's involved with the government, and I can't tell to what extent he's just a big old bullshitter. And, if they're serious in any capacity about trying to find fraud and abuse and make cuts. So I'm curious of what your expectation will be from the entire Doge movement, what you think of Elon Musk. And I think we both have a similar stance on Donald Trump of he's kind of a wild card and it's hard to get a read because, I've said it's clickbait news. He just kind of says things, even if he doesn't plan on following through with it.
So Musk, you can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Musk, my fantasy, right? My hope is that Musk is so far off the end of the spectrum that he's not controllable, that he is deep state beyond a shadow of a doubt. You don't shoot rockets into space and build electric vehicles and build, you know, digital paying mechanisms and stuff without being deep state, right? But what I'm hoping is that the deep state needs him but can't control him. That's what I'm hoping. So I'm hoping that what you're seeing is Elon going off the rails and doing what Elon wants to do, which he's notorious at doing, and that he does want to change the world in this way. Now, someone asked him the other day in an interview, "Who's running your companies?" And he looked very uncomfortable. he kind of sat there, and it's like a sore spot. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot I own a space company, don't I? So I'm hoping that he's serious. But given his background, if it turns out he's not, and that this is all just some scam, you couldn't possibly claim you were shocked. What I need to see is not just headlines about savings. So let's say they set up an LGBTQ organization in Indonesia, right? You go, well, it's pretty clear they didn't get the money, right? There's no that's just a scam. There's layers of the onion that don't bother me and layers that do. So if I find out that that's a CIA black ops, I go, so what, right? CIA's been doing this shit for years. We knew it. They knew it. You know, they just laundered some money because they needed more shit to do. And it's not that I like it, but I'm not shocked. If it turns out that it's to pay off some warlord, same thing. We've been paying off warlords since the dawn of time. So this doesn't rattle my worldview either. If it turns out it was coming back to the DNC, then I start getting mad. And if it turns out it was coming back to, you know, Stacey Abrams or something, you know, then I get real mad. And so we need to shut them off, but we also got to find out what they were. And you could say we got to get convictions, but boy, there are millions, literally millions of people who could be convicted of crimes in this story. Millions upon millions of people who could be convicted of crimes. And it's not clear that we want to just turn the entire United States into a gulag of crooked people. So I don't know how to handle that, but I do want to know. I do want to know who tried to shoot Trump. I want to know how many FBI guys were in the crowd at January 6th. There's certain things that they owe us explanations. And in fact, every single narrative, I want to know what's behind it. And I want them to stop it. But remember when FTX went down the tubes, right? And Sam Bankrupt Fraud, you know, got caught and stuff. That money was all being laundered through Ukraine back to the DNC. A lot of it was. I think some of those people should be in prison, not just Sam. Sam actually looks a little victimesque there, right? Sam never looked like he never looked like a criminal. He looked like a patsy. He had Oswald written on his forehead. And
he looked like a big old doofus, but it's hard to know to what extent.
It is hard to know.
Yeah, because I actually think he was smart enough. He knew what he was doing, and
he did know what he was doing, but I didn't think he understood the big game. I think he didn't realize that he was running with the big dogs, and he didn't realize that was a dangerous game.
All right, I got 3 more topics I want to hit, and they're all fairly juicy. My next one is, I don't talk about firstly, I'm not a particularly savvy investor, and my focus is limited, and I read through the news every day, and then every afternoon I write down my little 8 things that I think might do well that I want to research, then I never take any action. Now, for the most part, you know, I just think we're in a big old bubble, and I always think, hey, this thing's coming down. The Fed has put so much money into the system. When is this going to correct? And I know that you have everyone should go read both last year's and this year's end of year recap, because basically you just speak to a reversion to the mean. And I would say the most simplistic way for people that are not that savvy is just kind of looking at PE ratios and how inflated those are versus what the historic stock average was. Now, what are your defensive stock moves? I know you can't really give stock tips or financial advice,
I've
But
never understood why you're not supposed to be able to do that. Everyone always says this is not financial advice. I go, well, it is. You're just a dumbass if you take it, right?
there you go. So I'm curious, what are your big defensive moves for, or do you think, because this is the first time, by the way, there seems to be a little bit more recession panic. They're trying to somewhat pin it on that Donald Trump's, igniting the fire with the foolish tariff strategy. I think the Bidens were kind of juicing the numbers to make the economy look like it was better than it was. But this is the first time that I'm reading that consumer spending is it. I don't know that I've seen formal numbers of consumer spending being down. I more just read the tea leaves of the news and the way that they're reporting information. And there were a lot of articles this past week. Delta Airlines is getting spooked. Dollar Tree is noticing people are buying like just the staple goods. It seems like a lot of stores are starting to report that people are spending a lot less money. I'm curious your thoughts on the economy this year, stock market this year, and where you're trying to throw your money so that the government doesn't steal it from you.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a low frequency trader, which means I try to get it right, and I don't change unless I see a real fundamental sea change, a really fundamental sea change. So actually, a minor recession doesn't do squat for me. So I was all bonds until '87. The market crashed. A colleague said, you really ought to own some stocks. This was in the context of the crash. And I dug into it. I said, yeah, you're right. So bonds were great from 80 to 87, I should add.
That's because the interest rate back then was what, like 10%?
Phenomenal. Yeah. No,
yeah.
Higher than that. It's like 15.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then
isn't it, by the way, isn't it just funny to think that if you were alive like for Volcker and you just bought the 30-year treasuries, you'd be the
you got
greatest
rich
investor of all time?
God, yes. God, yes. God, yes. Zero coupon bonds. Oh my God, yes. So I went into equities in '87 and became a raging bull, which most people couldn't fathom because, as I like to say, I'm the most bearish guy on Twitter. Period. There's no one is more bearish than me unless they're calling for an asteroid. And so in '87, I started going hard into equities, and by the mid '90s, I was wildly bullish. This brave new world, tech's going to change everything. I made 700% on WorldCom. I made 700% on Dell. I had at least 1 year, maybe two, that I had over 100% return. And I was a believer. And then around 98, all of a sudden I go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I had read enough books and stuff. I said the market structure is wrong. So by mid '99, I was out. I got out. And it was Y2K inspired. It was risk of unknown probability. And I said, okay, I'm getting out of the way of this. The markets are way overvalued. There's no reason to be taking this risk. And so in mid '99, I had exited every last equity. I had taken a short position, which I did twice, and I'll never do it again. I just think that's for fools. I was a fool.
You're fighting the Fed, and it's scary. It's just a scary approach.
There's also not as big. There's not a big upside. I made 30% on the short position, but it was just luck. And then I bought a bunch of gold, and I've held it ever since. So my cost basis on the first purchase of gold was actually below 256 because I was buying it in a closed-end mutual fund that was trading something like 20% below NAV. So I was getting it for like the equivalent of about $2.10 an ounce. And I thought inflation was coming. So after Y2K didn't come, and by the way, Y2K was a grift. It took me years to figure this out. There was this guy named Yeager who was talking about Y2K and how it was going to really destroy the world and shit like that. About 6 months before Y2K showed up, Yeager said, okay, never mind. And I'm going, wait a minute, what do you mean never mind? What do you mean? You just said, and then literally nothing happened. Literally nothing happened, right? Oh, no, there are a few brush fires. There were no brush fires. So it was the tech world saying, let's sell these fuckers computers and software. They played right along. Oh yeah, you got to fix your computer. Y2K, you got to buy a new Dell. Got to buy right. It was great. After Y2K, and coast was clear. I go, no, it's not. These markets are crazy. So I held the short position. I held the gold. Around 2000, 2001, I was afraid of inflation, so I started buying energy as an inflation hedge, and by luck caught the commodity cycle. So I didn't buy energy because I thought energy was going to go up. I thought it's because I thought energy would hedge against inflation. So my best decade ever graded on a curve was, although the 90s, I made a ton of money. My best decade was actually the noughts, because everyone was getting obliterated in the noughts. And I compounded 13%. And with a decade, like, who needs another good decade after that? I missed the teens completely. When the market tanked in 08, 09, there was another halving in it based on historical metrics. That market should have cut in half again. And as Einhorn once said, a market that's gone down 90%, you know what that is? He says it's a market that went down 80% and then cut in half, right? Which is a warning, right? Just because it's gone down, just because you've dropped from, 150,000 feet, you're now at 30,000, doesn't mean you're safe. And so I missed the teens, and my compounded return was like 4% over the teens. I'm parked in gold, parked in a lot of cash, 2-year treasury sort of flavor. My equity position, somewhat because I can't control it completely because of the way it's situated, probably 10% in equities with an emphasis on energy. And I'm just waiting. I'm just hunkered down.
And do you think with the cash, because I'm cash heavy, I'm not even sophisticated enough to be treasuries. It's mostly high yield savings account. And,
well, that's fine. If you're getting 4%, that's fine. Whatever.
Yeah. So I'm basically sitting most of my savings is high yield savings account, and then my general theory for the stock market is whatever I can max out on the tax savings, whatever. I don't even remember what it's called.
Make sure your high yield savings account's not a reach for yield, though. That's your description is a high yield savings account. I see things that say we can get you 6%. I go, no, you can't. No, you can't.
No. I'm in the what do I have? I have it mostly in the Goldman Marcus thing, which is 4%. It's CDs. That's all it is.
Okay.
Okay. Now, my question for you is, as a person who's mainly held on to cash, and then you're always in this game where you're like, do they have more leeway to just kind of keep credit asset bubbles, going forever, in which case your cash is going to continue to be lost to inflation? Or at some point, do they actually run out of room and we start seeing prices coming down and we get our buy opportunity because we've been sitting on cash?
Well, first and foremost, what I'll point out is by 25 different metrics, and they give a different answer each case, but they're all roughly consistent with each other. The markets are approximately 200% over historical average valuation. The best example is to take the Case-Shiller PE, which is a sort of a smooth PE. From 1880 to 1990, it averaged about 12. It is now fucking 38. Now, if 1880 to 1990 doesn't set a baseline for you, your standards are just too high, because that's a good baseline. Around 1994, the markets left the channel and never looked back. No one has given me a credible explanation as to why that's sustainable. Now, good explanations as to why it is sustained for a very long time include, Mike Green's, passive flow money. That passive flow money at some point is going to reverse. And then you're going to get hurt. So you're 200% over historical average valuation. Let's say you block and tackle your way out. You grow the GDP 2.5% a year. No huge calamities along the way, none that aren't just reversible over time, things like that. It will take 45 years to undo that overvaluation. Now, the market's not going to wait 45 years. What I like to do is ask people rhetorically, name a market that got way overvalued that didn't eventually get cheap. There is no such market. Never has been, in my opinion, never will be. The question is when and how cheap. So if you're 200% over historical valuation, at some point you are going to give it back, in my opinion. Any more gains that you can get from here, it's like you're in a plane and the engines are on fire and you're 35,000 feet. Take it to 45,000 if you want. But at some point, you're going to end up at the crash site. Now, crashes aren't going to fix it. People talk, oh, you predict a crash? No, crashes don't do any good, because as soon as you crash, dip buyers show up. What deals with valuation problems is when you knock the investors down and they get up, and you knock them down again and they get up, and you knock them down again and they get up, and you finally they say, fuck it, I am never buying another fucking share because I cannot take any more fucking beatings. Now you've corrected. Now, the definition of a correction should include Not only that you deal with the excessive price, but that it doesn't bounce. Because if it bounces, right, you haven't corrected anything. So if they call this 10% a correction, and 3 months from now it's back to an all-time high, where does the word correct come into that? Go look it up in Merriam Dictionary. You got to fix something. So to me, to fix the markets, to get back to historical average valuation, which by the way is what you would predict is needed to get historical returns, you got to cut the market by 70%.
And that's
it's
like
arithmetic.
And that's like the S&P at like what 1750
2000. I'll give it 2000.
Yeah. It's funny because every time I glance at a chart, that's about where I'm like, I think the S&P is supposed to be about here. All right, 2 more topics. Are you willing? Can we cover 2 more?
Yeah. I can talk all day.
Excellent. All right. So I listened to your zero hedge
debate,
and then I listened to another one of your interviews on that. I'm, like I said, not a great science student. Like the old Reagan line of "There's nothing scarier than the government saying I'm the government and I'm here to help." My general attitude towards global warming is I can't tell you the specifics, but there's nothing I fear more than centralized government coming in to solve what it's telling me is a problem. I think that it's mostly a big old scam, and to whatever extent it exists, our best opportunity is economic growth and consuming some resources. And I'm just not concerned with it. I'm more concerned with economic problems if we try and basically. And I think carbon credit scams is essentially church pittances where the elites are going to have access to this thing that I'm going to have to pay for. Now, one of the things I don't know how to debunk is when I hear this claim, and I know that you very specifically have addressed this, of, well, there's a scientific consensus about man-made, that man is creating the global warming, that the planet's getting hotter, and it's because of man's influence. And now I've even taken the approach that I don't know the size and scope of that, but I just don't want government intervention in it because my understanding of just scams, the government, I have an understanding of different things that allow me to look at this one and go, hey, this is a big old crock of shit. And then I've seen some of the specifics, about why it's a crock of shit, but just specifically to address the claim of all scientists agree on the fact that there is let's even take the extreme catastrophic man-induced global warming or even man-induced global warming. I'd love to hear the debunking on why that claim's not true.
Well, if you remember the debate, I did very little talking, actually. Steve Keen was, in my opinion, so busy shooting his foot off that I just let him keep talking. He opened with describing the chemistry of the atmosphere, and I'm thinking, so you're going to open against a chemist describing chemistry. Okay, that's a good play. Then he starts talking about how he knows scientists, and I'm going, so you're going to tell a scientist you know scientists? And I go, and then at the very end, I point out that I don't think there's a shred of evidence of global warming. I don't think there's a shred of anthropogenic global warming that's of any consequence. If you ask Steve Koonin, former provost NYU, former Caltech physicist, modeler, you name it, he pays lip service to it being mild. I believe he's attempting to keep from being pushed totally off the stage. And so it's like if you read about COVID, some guy writes a paper on the vaccine. The opening paragraph says, these vaccines save millions of lives. And then he'll say, and we just did a small clinical study to explain why people are bleeding profusely out of their asses. And then, they had to kiss the brass ring of the vaccine. They had to. So if the way you get consensus is everyone who doesn't support the narrative, you shut up. You totally censor. Now, so one of the things I did to Steve in that debate, the first thing that happened was, my whole path to this is I believed it because I believed in the scientific process. I'm sitting with the Secretary of Energy, and I told him I was agnostic, and he flinched. He was a global warming guy. And he said, why? And I said, because it would take me 10,000 hours to figure this out. And I don't have 10,000 hours to put into it. He said, oh, that's okay. So my brother and someone else started pestering me. And they said, how do you know? And I finally said, look, I don't know any credible scientists who don't believe this. And one of them said, oh, yeah, there are. And I said, send me some names. And I expected to get names, from Joe Schmuck, from, adjunct professor, Sheboygan State College, of professor of who the fuck cares, right? And he sends me a list of names, and it's Harvard, Stanford, Caltech, you name it. And I say, okay, but these guys probably didn't say it was bullshit. They probably shot down some model that didn't work, and therefore the denialists are then running with that. So I started looking up what they had to say, and they're going, no, they're saying it's bullshit. So I can list for you Nobel Prize after Nobel Prize in physics who are saying it's bullshit. The former head of the National Academy of Science is saying it's bullshit. The American Physics Society put together an elite 12-person committee to look at the problem and say, what is going on here? And with guys like Freeman Dyson, these are legends of physics. And they came out and said it was bullshit. NASA, 500 scientists at NASA sent a letter saying, please dial back your rhetoric. And then you find out there's not a shred of evidence of increased frequency or severity of hurricanes, of tornadoes, of severe climate events of any kind, of heat waves, of cold snaps. There's none over 150 years, no evidence. Now, you can find evidence. It's coming from the guys who are lying their ass off, like Michael Mann, who was in the middle of ClimateGate, where the emails came out showing that it was bullshit. And his co-authors said, I want to puke based on the shit we just wrote.
That one's always been funny, the climate events, because climate events have always existed, and your best opportunity for combating them is making use of energy. It's literally.
But it's those things like the starving polar bear, right? Oh my God,
Have you seen that great meme of it's like, maybe I think this was even in your end of year thing of
might have been,
yeah. That can you believe that? What was it, like 50 years ago? There were only 7,000 polar bears. Now there's 40,000.
Yeah. As Konstantin Kaysin said, the global shortage of polar bears. And then you see a 2021 glacier that's receded, and a 1921 picture of the same glacier that's way farther forward. And they say, look, any fucking idiot can see it. And what they forget to mention is that underneath that receded glacier were 1,200-year-old trees, which, by the way, they fucking grew there. They grew there. And so there's it's just not. And the problem is the field also draws nitwits. So you show me a kid who says, I want to solve the global warming problem. I'll show you a kid who's not serious.
I also
so what I did to Steve, here's what I did to Steve, and you might remember this. I went to AI and said, name for me 20 prominent scientists who believe that global warming is not a problem. And it gave me 20 people. I knew probably 18 of the 20, so they were the logical people. And I'd asked Tom Nelson, who knows this world very well, I said, Tom, can you name me a solar physicist who signs off on the model of global warming being a problem? He says, no, but I don't trust it, right? Tom's been doing podcasts for 15 years now. He did a documentary. Then he knows his shit. But I go, okay. So I go to AI and I ask the same question. I said, can you name me the top 10 most prominent scientists who think, top 10 most prominent solar physicists who think climate change is a crisis? And they said, the answer was, there are no definitive statements by solar physicists about climate change being a crisis. The physicists, the guys with brains that are so big they can barely carry them around the campus, the guys who know what's going on with the sun cycles, with sunspots, and with the source of the heat. There's not a single prominent one who says man-made global warming's the problem. That should destroy the opposition. But it doesn't, because it's a multi-tens of trillions of dollar grift. At one point, John Kerry was talking about what we should do to occlude CO2 when he presented the model. And some senator interviewed him. He said, how much do you need to occlude? John Kerry said, how much? And he said, based on your model, it'll cost $1.5 quadrillion. And John Kerry signed off on that. And I'm going, you choke the chicken at skull and bones, right? You're an idiot. You're a moron. By the way, you have your own issues. You and Bob Mueller being in the same prep school together and shit like that. So no, I think the entire thing is a scam, and I have not seen anything in probably the last 5 years to even slightly knock me off that belief.
All right. So in addressing how it's a scam, I know in some of the reading I've done, I read basically that the um the marginal damage of carbon in the atmosphere goes down the more you put in. So, like actually weighing the damage of it, and even the reductions that we would do, it doesn't matter because
Well,
the more
use
you
the
dump
word
in.
damage. Let's use the word influenced by the influence on the sun's rays.
Okay, and then
Because I don't think the word damage is appropriate at all.
fair enough. And then we also have carbon has a greening effect on the environment. And then let's get into more specifically the fact of that there's actually not a correlation between, I guess, the industrial period and a warming of the environment, which I believe Gene Epstein said on the show that during the Industrial Revolution, we actually had lesser temperatures.
Alex Epstein.
No, Gene Epstein was quoting someone else. Gene Epstein's an
Okay,
economist and a friend of mine.
Right. Okay.
And then I'll give it back to you because you were, from what I was gathering, you were also saying that there was, during the Renaissance period, there was a heating and there was no carbon then, and that also a lot of the measurements that they do are in cities that retain heat. I think that was the short of why the measurements are off. But I'll hand it back to you so you can tell us how there's literally no science to suggest that, it's actually increasing in temperature other than just the general trends of that the earth changes.
Well, the Middle Ages was hotter than it is now. The civilizations of history appear to have all arisen during warm periods. The hottest decade in the 20th century was the 1930s. That's when we had the Dust Bowl and things like that, but that was land management. So much of what you see claimed to be global warming is land management. It's just, yeah. So we got a lot of fires in Southern California. Could it possibly have to do with what we're building, right? Could it possibly have to do with what we're doing to California?
Well, one of them was literally started by a faulty. Well, one of them was started because of a person doing a gender reveal party, and he had another fire. That's true, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of them was started by a gender reveal party. The other one was a faulty circuit breaker from that was out in the woods from the electric company, the socialized electric company. And then I forget what the most recent one was, but I don't know. We've had fires forever. I don't think it's because the carbon.
Well, the other thing I like to ask people, so let's assume global warming is raging, right? So if you look at the amount that the temperature supposedly is rising and it's going to be catastrophic, and you look at the per year rise, you look at the rise in sea level, they're so small on a year by year basis. And then someone will look outside and say, look, it's so fucking hot out there. As I said, just because you got sweat dripping off your ass doesn't mean there's global warming. And just because I froze my ass off this winter doesn't mean global warming isn't true either. You can't see global warming. It takes phenomenal measurements of the highest caliber to make a statistically sound argument either way. The average person, I see articles where they say, there's a rash of kidney stones. They talk about kidney stone clinics being set up, right? Absurd things. And they go, because of the warming. I go, so let me see if I got this right. I live down at the lake. It's about 4 degrees warmer than a half a mile up the hill. So am I going to get kidney stones because I'm living down? If I move to Pennsylvania from New York, am I going to get kidney stones? Are the people in Florida just big rocks rolling around Florida because they're kidney stones, right? Some of the stupidest fucking people in the world gravitate to this story. And so you get some of the stupidest ideas. Now, here's what really bothers me. I watched some guy from my own university talking about putting aerosols in the air to reflect the sun. I go, Who's going to give that guy the authority to do that beyond stupid experiment? It's probably already being done. So there's that, all the fucking chemtrails and shit. But they're trying to create mosquitoes and shit that spread vaccines. They're trying to put vaccinable shit in our food supply. Who gets to make these calls? Because those people should be euthanized.
All right. So just two more things on specifically global warming, and then I want to move to our last topic, which I think we'll leave YouTube for. But all right. One is when you were talking about the astrophysicist, and I'm just gonna say the sun theory. I'm gonna stupidify it for myself. So I don't know what exactly you're referring to there of, I guess, the sunspots or otherwise that might be influencing the climate that has, I guess, more of an impact than this fake global warming thing that I hear about.
So one of the most stunning things, actually, when you start digging into this, is that the sun has cycles that are profoundly predictable. I mean, they're as predictable as night and day, coming and going. They're really on. Look up Milankovitch cycles, and they can tell us when we're about to head into a downturn in solar activity and an upturn. And then there's small wavelength, and there's the big wavelength ones, and it's stunningly predictable. And I don't know why, but the physicists have no trouble. And the irony is, we're about to head into a cold snap. So we're going to be trying to figure out how to put particles in the sky to trap heat. Now, one of the most interesting arguments I heard actually came from a guy talking to Steve Keen, where I had made the argument that, look, let's say it warmed, we'll just grow our food up in Saskatchewan instead of in Kansas, right? But the guy said, yes and no. It might be warm up there. This was one of the more interesting arguments. It might be warm up there, but it won't be any sunnier. And so the candle power, the intensity of the sun's rays will still be diminished up there, which means you can't replace Kansas with a northern growing area. And so that debunks one of the sort of flippant responses that the solar physicists watch the sun and go, it's about to roll over. Now, this all ties with the idea that sunspot activity and gamma rays coming off the sun could fry our entire electrical grid. And there's a whole independent debate about whether we're about to get our electrical grid side fried by, because it turns out that if we get a rash of sunspots with the right timing, the Earth will get hit with this flood of gamma rays, and it will completely scorch everything digital. When I say scorch, the last time it happened was in 1859, and it fried our entire telegraph system. Now, that thing had cable that was probably this big, right? This was not microcircuitry. Supposedly, telegraph poles were getting lit on fire. Now, if we get hit with another one of those, we could lose everything.
Well, you just gave me my next scam, which is we got to sell blankets that you can protect your gear from gamma rays.
It turns out you can't. The evidence is you can't.
Yeah, but no one knows that. And once
the
world goes to shit, you're the chemist. Just tell them that you got the one chemical for it, and we'll run some Rumble ads. We'll
put it right up there with the ads where some drug, some protein shake will get rid of spike protein out of your blood.
There you go. Okay, and then last question for you on global warming is so I was listening to another podcast with you, and I thought you had a great take on that. You have to differentiate the different issues that are faced in the climate. Pollution's a separate issue than global warming, and you might have an argument for why there should be less pollution. And you had other categories there, and I thought that is a Weasley trick that people will use, is shifting goalposts and wrapping in other issues. One of the issues that you mentioned was resource depletion. And to my eye, that's never been something that I've been concerned with, because I've read about when they've yelled about peak oil in the past. And from what I understand of economics is the more we make use of the resources in the planet that have been made available to us, the more economic growth we have, the more wealth that's created, and usually the new technologies that are found to either we don't have to rely on that initial resources, or it becomes so profitable and the technological advances become so great that we're able to get we're able to get more from less. So for example, oil, we can now get oil from places we couldn't in the past because we've developed the technology to do so. And as the price of oil goes up, it becomes more profitable to extract it from the harder to find places. And I would assume that there's somewhat a relationship when it comes to everything in the earth, like even, for example, what the you might need lithium for a microchip, but to think in 100 years from now, they wouldn't know how to make a microchip with less lithium. That's not specific. I don't even know if there's lithium in microchips, but just from what I understand of the kind of the relationship between economic growth, using resources, and then continuing to use them is that the technology gets better. You're able to either to extract it from tougher places because you have the it's expensive enough that it's worthwhile to do so. And so there's kind of like a perfect relationship there that we don't really seem to run out of things. You, from what I've seen, have more concern for basically resource depletion, but I didn't, you kind of had said it as a side. So I was curious to hear more about what the concerns with resource depletion are.
Well, ultimately, it's a finite orb with an infinite growth model. So at some point, I remember my brother in high school telling me that the economy had to keep growing to be healthy, and I go, but it can't grow forever. What does grow forever is knowledge. It's kind of what you're implying. So if you actually look at the real growth in the GDP from the time of Christ to get to where we are today, to get the wealth we have today from the time of Christ, it had to grow to like 0.1% a year. And so GDP doesn't really grow that fast. The problem is that I think of the earth as like this big citrus fruit, and you're squeezing juice out of it. And at some point you will have invented enough mechanisms to squeeze juice out of it where you go, look, we're kind of out of juice now, right? And I don't know when that's coming. Now, I read every peak oil book back 20 years ago, Matt Simmons and Hubbard's Peak and all that crap. And it has not arrived. But what I'll tell you is this technological advances that are getting us all the oil we need, we are going deeper into the Gulf of Mexico. We're going deeper into the Arctic. We're going deeper into weird places. That tells me, although the technology is keeping up with the supply constraints, the supply constraints are still measurable.
But don't you get to a point, like I know
now Doomberg will tell you that we're flooded with oil, and Doomberg knows this shit better than me. He gives me pause, but I know other smart people who agree with what I just said.
But don't you have? I know that from what I've seen, there's been a reluctance to make use of nuclear energy, and it's
almost I'm a big nuke fan,
and it's almost
we go nuke, we're good,
right? So what I wonder though is in terms of just not just oil, but just the idea of resource depletion. Isn't our ability to invent new options because we've used what's here almost infinite? Like, so for example, we probably could have moved on from oil already to nuclear. We just kind of haven't. And who knows what kind of fusion or other technology might present itself if we just kind of continue to go full gas to the metal economic growth. I would assume that that's probably, it almost feels like it's built into the algorithm of life. If you actually have free markets, that when you start running out of a resource, you'll probably figure out how to replace it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I actually even have this theory that, certainly I have some investments in the nukes, right? Some of my portfolio, which is not
I've done
big.
well with it. Rolls-Royce and uranium. Those were my two plays, and I've done well with both.
Right. The reason I don't have a big investment is because when the selling starts, everything goes down. Absolutely everything goes down.
I also got NuScale.
So I invest in Gehring and Rosenzweig, who are very good at cherry picking small cap uranium plays and things like that. And so Gehring and Rosenzweig, they actually have a fund you can buy. You don't have to hand them, sort of privately managed money. And I owe some Cameco and things like that. What's keeping me from doing a Texas Hold'em is that when the selling starts, everything drops. You can have a stock with a PE of 10. There's nothing that says it can't go to 5. And so I am slowly but surely accumulating lists of guys I'd be willing to give my money to manage. Like there's a small cap guy named Eric Cinnamon, and he sits on every conference call. He rides conference calls all year long. And I give him ideas, and he clearly doesn't bite, which tells me he's not a hip shooter, right? He is currently something like 80% cash. I am paying him to wait. And so I like that. I like that level of patience that he's displaying. And he had closed up a fund for years, and then he reopened it, but he's sitting in cash. and and then some of what he does invest in is gold and things like that. So he's really doing nothing. And so I'm collecting money managers. There's Horizon Kinetics I kind of like. And then I'm watching sectors that I think will be good, but I think they'll be good after
waiting
this.
Till after the shitstorm, because I've seen it myself. You can own a good company, but when the shitstorm happens and the fake capital washes out, the evaluations are coming down even on the good stuff.
So I think we have probably a commodity play, one of these multi-decade commodity plays coming again, but I don't think it's going to start yet. I'm watching platinum like a hawk. The platinum story is a great story. Now, I bought some platinum miners. They were dirt cheap. And you know what? They got dirt cheaper.
I had the same thing with gold. At some point, I wanted to buy physical gold. Someone convinced me to go with the miners instead. And as gold goes up, it has nothing to do with my gold, whatever.
I just do not like the way they analyze. I wish they'd just say, look, this miner has a PE of 5 and cash on the balance sheet. But they don't do it that way. They analyze miners in a different way that I don't understand. So I own some miners, but it's because some guy like Fleckenstein says, of all these crappy miners, these are the 3 I like. And so I go, okay, so I'll give Bill my vote of confidence there, but not a big position, not big at all. I mean, as in, I have very few positions that if they went to 0 today, I would necessarily end in the red. That's how small some of them are. Gold would clobber me if it went to 0. Cash, if somehow the banking system seized up, it would clobber me. So at some point, I hope to be able to do Texas Hold'em. I like platinum because platinum is a bet. First of all, it has never gone meme. Of all the metals, it's the one that's just kind of sat there and said, fuck you to the whole meme thing, right? You've seen palladium soar. You've seen all sorts of shit soar. Platinum's just sit there for 10 years. It's like someone just anchored it at $1,000 an ounce. And a guy named, I shouldn't say his name, was wildly bullish on platinum 2 years ago. And I just kind of started watching. But I felt no urge to move. And it's just saying, so I own a tiny position of platinum. I talked to Peter Bookfire is now moving into platinum. David Einhorn expressed some interest to me in platinum. So platinum could see its day in the sun, but I don't have to move right now because it's just sitting there at $1,000 an ounce. And I actually asked Peter Brandt the other day. I showed him the chart. I DM'd him and said, when you look at this chart, what would get you interested with this chart? And he drew some lines on it and said, right here, that sort of thing. So platinum goes up to 1,100 in the technical analysis world. That to me looks like kind of a breakout zone where it means it's broken out of its corral, and then it could go meme. Now, why do I like it? I don't invest that way. Very rarely do I invest. That's keeping me from getting in right now. The fundamental case for platinum is the internal combustion engine's not dead. I think the electric vehicle market may be dead. I think the hybrid market is where the two meet at a compromise. Hybrids use more platinum than internal combustion engines.
Interesting.
And the platinum miners might suck because they're in South America. And South America looks like maybe a failed state as they slaughter white farmers, right? Platinum also comes out of Russia. Well, we've had some troubles with Russia lately, right? And so it's all these things that are bad news for miners are potentially good news for the price. And so I'm just watching platinum, and I've got chips stacked up, and I'm just sitting there going, when platinum looks to me like someone's got a whiff, and I know that Bookfire, I was with him in a meeting in November, and he had just taken his first long position in platinum. And so I think there's serious players who are going, platinum is the place to be. But I don't yet have to move. And every day that platinum doesn't move up and the markets go down makes me feel better about when I finally have to move on platinum.
There you go. I got one more topic that I'd like to cover, and I basically want to get into RFK Jr. and some of the chemicals that he takes issue with.
Okay.
Before we do, if you don't mind, 2 hours and 3 minutes is pretty good for me for holding my bladder. I'd like to take a quick bathroom
Sure.
break.
Sure.
Maybe you can charge the headphones. By the way, if you don't need a bathroom break, you can just talk directly to the people. I'll be back in 2 minutes, or maybe you want to take a break as well. All right, I think we're both taking a break. Everyone, I'm not ending the stream. I will be back in literally 2 minutes, and we'll be back at it. You guys, people in the chat, you can talk amongst yourselves. Shout out to the sponsors, YoKratom.com, Sheet.com, promo code ROAM, Phoenix Ammo, all the good people. Back in a minute. And we're back. Wow, that was well timed. Both arrived at the same time. People in the chat, did you catch the producer goblin who unplugs things every time I walk away? All right, Professor Collin, before I move on to RFK Jr., you're talking about hoarding all the gold. I think you're muted at this second. Sorry, you were muted there for a second.
Let me ask you a question. Was that live the whole time?
Yeah, I'm not, and I won't even edit it in post.
I think I went back and pissed inside of the camera.
Did you really?
I may have. I don't know. You're live. Can anyone comment? Is there anyone who can comment?
I think no one's commented that they were watching you pee, so I think you're in good shape.
I'm gonna watch this because I think I pissed. So behind me, I keep a glass. I had a 1.5-inch bladder stone, and I said, "Fuck it, I can't keep going to the bathroom." So I just started pissing in a cup in my office, and then I go out to my lab and dump it in the sink. And I think I just did that. I think you turned off the camera.
I'm sorry. I thought I announced we were remaining live. If you want to start a new stream, I can.
No, I don't give a shit.
You don't give a shit. There you go.
That's a record breaker for me.
There you go. That's legendary.
That's a bucket list. Yeah, I just hit the podcast Hall of Fame with that one.
There you go. If you guys wanted to know if they're still cool on college campuses, you just got your answer right there. They just pulled an Ari Shaffir. Pete on the stream doesn't care. Love it.
Yeah, I know. At least I'm not Jeffrey Toobin.
There you go. That rules. Hey, maybe we'll actually get some good press out of this. We'll let the world know if you're interested in seeing Professor Collin pee in his office in the background of a podcast. It just happened live on air. I hope you don't get in trouble with the university for peeing in the office. I mean, it's on them. You know, the budgets haven't come through for in-office urinals. That's on them.
That's exactly right.
All right. So before we move on to RFK Jr., so you said you've been loading up on gold. I'm curious. Bitcoin's not of any interest to you?
Well, it's of interest, and I respect the hodlers, but I see two potential problems for Bitcoin that have my attention. One is that Bitcoin gets normalized to the point where it's not Bitcoin, right? Where it's been absorbed by the Borg, and so I also worry that the state's going to try to destroy it, right? And they haven't tried yet. And then the last thing is that it could end up being absorbed into a CBDC, in my opinion. My whole theory on Bitcoin is that they released it so smart fuckers could debunk all the problems and set up all the networking and get everyone acclimated and say, okay, now step aside, we'll take it from here.
Oh, that's good conspiracy. I like
and
that.
Then, well, that's what I do. And then lastly, you guys haven't been through a big global downturn yet. You've had Bitcoin downturns, and everyone always says, oh, we've dropped 80%. I go, you haven't dropped 80% while the banking system's collapsing. And so how Bitcoin performs in the next significant downturn, which I think is going to be a severe one, I will be watching it like a hawk. So I don't need Bitcoin to get rich. I certainly need Bitcoin not to make me poor. Okay, so I don't need to get rich. If I don't fuck up, I'm good for the rest of my life.
Speaking to that, it's certainly, I thought that Bitcoin was kind of pitched to me as the alternative asset. And there's so much speculators that kind of poured into it that it seemed from this slight pullback that happened in the market before you ended up with the government just sending people checks, Bitcoin kind of came down with the rest of the market. So I agree with you that if there's a big time event that washes a lot of capital out of the system, I don't think Bitcoin's going to ride high. I think it will probably pull back as well.
Well, the other thing is it seems to track the NASDAQ more than anything. And if you're a market bear and you see an asset tracking the NASDAQ, you should probably duck.
All right. So I want to hop into our last topic. Before we do, I'm going to come down from YouTube because in the past, even when I've given favorable vaccine coverage, that seems to be the one topic that the second I bring it up, and I even have people defending.
Is that true even to the president? Is that still
to the
true?
president? I've had a doctor, and I've had I call my resident non-scientist autistic expert, and I've had both of them on defending the childhood vaccine, basically the current protocol, and it got strikes on YouTube both times that I then submitted to them. Hey guys, I was interested in the topic and these people were defending.
So where does this end up then? At Rumble? Does it end up at Rumble?
Yeah, so at the moment, anyone who's interested in continuing to watch the stream, we're currently streaming on Twitter. We're streaming on Rumble, or you can go directly to my website where it should be streaming as well, robbernsteincomedy.com. My guess is the easiest place to find it is on Twitter, Robbie the Fire. We're currently live. So I'm gonna pull down from YouTube, but for anyone interested, they can find it there. It'll be up tomorrow everywhere you get podcasts, which is basically the video version on Spotify and the audio version wherever you like podcasts. But if you want to see Professor Colin P, you're going to have to actually find the video.
Well, if that doesn't get you a fucking a warning from YouTube, then their standards are very erratic.
I bet if we hadn't mentioned it, it wouldn't have made the. I don't think they actually pick up the video. I think they just scrape the audio for red flags.
So if you look back there, it's way back by the chalkboard. So it's conceivable you wouldn't notice it because it's way in the background.
There you go. All right, let me.
But I think that someone will go back and look and say, oh, there.